Hello everybody, what is up? Cobra here. Today we've got another look at my Roman Empire or Ancient Empires game. Now, a lot has changed again since the last time we updated you, but we will go into some of the things I've added and I guess a little bit of how the game will work, or my ideas for how the game will work. So, one of the major things that I've done recently is added all these sea zones, which you'll notice are a bit different than normal Axis and Allies. Plus, I've named all these territories painstakingly. It was not fun to do all this research into ancient naming of different places, but I have figured it all out more or less, and everything is all named and ready to go. So this map is just about done, but I will go into basically one of the major things that I wanted to show you, which is the kind of new sea zones and how the movement will work. Because for one thing that some of you may notice is the fact that there's a lot more zones in this game, and with normal Axis and Allies style, say like infantry, moving one space at a time is not going to get you far in this game. So basically, I've introduced like a new movement system that's still under. I'm not sure how it's going to go down, but I kind of want to have some sort of variable movement. So it's either going to work in the way of you have, say, an army in Rome, and I'm thinking you either have to roll a die, like a d6, and see how far you'll be able to move that army. And like stuff like generals and leaders will be able to boost that movement. And then another thing I was wondering would be some sort of tracker, say it's your turn, and then you would have 15 movement points or 10 movement points, and you've got your entire empire, but you can only move that amount of like either individual pieces or full-on armies. So I again still kind of wondering about that, but maybe you guys might have some ideas, so I'd like to hear from you in the comment section if you do. Now, another thing that has to be explained is these new sea zones, and so we'll just kind of zoom in on Italy here because this kind of gives a good wrap of all of the different types of naval kind of zones that you're going to see in this game. Now, you can see I have some pieces on the board just to represent the scale of the game board if it's printed on a 4 by 8 foot map like normal global war. So let's say that, so for one, infantry, like all your land units will be able to move in the sea by themselves. Like they'll basically have like a built-in transport system, because at the time armies would have been able to basically like raise ships. Like stuff like naval warships required a bit more ingenuity, but things like barges and smaller coastal sailing ships and merchant liners could be built pretty easily, especially if you had like competent engineers. You could pretty much raise a small little transport flotilla on the coastline. So if you had the supplies, of course. But so basically that is how naval movement will work in terms of transporting your units around. So say you have an army in Rome, and let's say if we're using the die system, you roll 6 spaces. Well, you're going to be able, if you follow, say, let's just use this die as a representation. We have 6 spaces to move, so we're going to go 1 into the Mare Roma, 2, 3, we'll go 4 to the Messina Sea, and then 5 into Croton. So yeah, basically that's how it's going to work in terms of moving your armies around. Now, while that seems like it may be a great idea to just willy-nilly move all your armies around, there's going to be fleets, enemy warships basically spread out throughout the seas, and also neutral places like the Syracuse Sea will start with some neutral ships that won't allow you to pass. Plus, you've just got things like, so let's say for Rome, doing what I just mentioned, the Carthaginians have a pretty major navy, so they could just decide to blockade some of these ports, and then you won't be able to get your troops through. And if you have troops at sea, either run into enemy warships, or let's say that let's say that this army that I have, again represented by the die, rolls a 2. You move into the Mare Roma, that's 1, and then into the Tyrrhenian Sea, which now you don't have any more movement points. You can't move back onto the coast. So this is basically representing you kind of sitting on your invasion rafts, maybe at the coast, kind of docked, but you're just basically sitting there awaiting orders. Now, an enemy fleet, if you're unescorted, can come up here and then just basically pick your whole army off the map, because it's kind of like Axis and Allies. Unescorted transports can't really do anything. So that's where warships and galleys will come into play. Galleys will be pretty nice because of the fact that you can use them to escort your armies. So let's, again, place this galley right here. Get them both selected. Now we have an army escorted by one galley, and now you can basically take the galley with your army as like an escort along the sea, and your galley, of course, will work like a normal Axis and Allies style warship and fight anything that comes to bear. So that's basically where naval units will come into play, and of course you can just, you know, if you want to go control the seas, you can just take your fleet, send it out alone, and go try to attack some enemy warships or enemy fleets and transport flotillas. So yeah, another thing will be that warships, so let's move on to naval moves now that we've established kind of how units will move. Now, so we've got 3 different types of naval zones. So there's sea zones, which I call, these are pretty normal Axis and Allies zones, and just dragging this galley around. So like the North Tyrrhenian Sea, the Mare Roma, these are all just normal sea zones. They kind of work like Axis and Allies, where you've got ships in here. If enemy warships come into this sea zone, then there's a naval battle. So, and then these lines that connect the sea zones are just basically connection lines. So basically, you basically travel from sea zone to sea zone, as I said before. So like from Mare Roma to the North Tyrrhenian Sea would just be one movement point. Then you've got these little circles. Now these circles represent transit points, and how those work is they're basically points where you'd have to travel farther. So, but you can't stop there because, you know, warships at the time couldn't just dock out in the middle of the ocean and sit out for a few days, because they just didn't have the supplies, and also just things like anchors. You know, if a storm came along, they wouldn't fare too well. So how these travel points will work is that, let's say you're in Mare Neapolis, and you want to get to the Messina Strait. Well, you're going to go 1, you're going to land on this little blue dot, 2 to the Messina Strait. So it basically increases your amount of travel. And then finally, we have these sea zones that are marked with a Leviathan, and I've kind of done a cool thing where all the different places that had, you know, I took various little folklore items and put them in as the different Leviathans. But, you know, there's not going to be magic or anything in this game. What they represent is basically, they are called like dangerous or deep sea travel points, and these are basically, all the sea zone stuff is inspired by Pax Romana, another board game that is kind of, I've taken heavy inspiration from. But how these will work is they represent places that are kind of out in the middle of nowhere, you know, and as you can see with like the Tyrrhenian Sea here, which is kind of this whole area, there, if you're traveling from the Mare Labantium to Mare Roma, then, you know, you're traveling through a huge amount of open water there. That, you know, with galleys of the time, that may take you a few days to travel just over open water. And of course, without GPS or really good mapping, you could get lost pretty easily. And even if you knew where you were, stuff like storms could easily destroy these lighter built Mediterranean warships. So these will basically represent points where you can always circumnavigate them. Like, and as you can see, that along the coastline you don't have any points like that. So coastlines will be, you know, safer to travel, but these Leviathan deep sea zones are going to represent places, they're almost like shortcuts. You can see here that if the Carthaginians have a fleet, where this warship is right here, they could get a straight shot to Rome. The only problem is they have to risk their fleet going through this sea zone here. And I think how this will work is you'll have to roll for when you enter one of these, and if you hit something like a, I don't know what it would be, like a bad luck, maybe there's like a 1/3 chance you're going to hit it, then all your ships have to roll, and all your ships and all of your pieces basically, to see which ones are going to get lost. So who knows, you could lose, like, you know, with the chances of the die, you could lose 1/3 of your army trying to cross one of these. So they definitely represent pretty risky areas, and they too also represent places that you'll definitely want to use them at some points. Like, here's a pretty important one, a very long distance here where a Greek navy could travel all the way to kind of support the Italian Peninsula campaign if they want to support maybe Syracuse against the Italians. And then also over here, if the Egyptians want to try to reach out, then, and they don't want to go around the entire coastline here, they might have to get past some of these deep sea transit points to get to, say, the Greeks or the Seleucids on the other side. So yeah, that's basically kind of the sea zones in essence. Now, counting sea zones, like counting actual spaces, that's going to be for your land units mainly. So, you know, you roll the die and you're basically counting the amount of sea zones and these little transit zones that you go through to see how far your land units will go. But then on the other hand, warships are going to work a little differently. They're going to have unlimited movement points, but they will be limited by their surroundings, basically. So when traveling along a friendly coastline, so let's say we have a warship all the way up here in the Venetian lagoon, and let's say the Romans control their entire Italian peninsula, on their turn, you know, as long as they're not escorting any units, because of course those would be restricted to the amount of spaces they can go, but warships themselves along a friendly coast, you know, there's no warships along the way. This thing will be able to travel along the coastline all the way to the other side of Italy in one turn. So yeah, basically that's how that'll work. And of course they'll be limited if you want to maybe escort units, then of course they're going to you're going to want to keep them with your escorting units. But once you get to these non-friendly coastlines, basically places that you don't control, so let's say in Gaul here, Massala, nobody controls that at the beginning of the game, though there is a village. Basically, how that'll work is you can move your ship or your fleet into the sea zone, and then you have to make a die roll and see if you can stay or not. So if you want to keep going, you're going to have to roll a die, and it's like a 50-50 chance that either you'll be able to go on your merry way, you know, it worked out well, you found some supplies on the coastline and were able to ship off, or the other 50% side says that, you know, maybe you ran into some disease or there wasn't enough supplies that you could scavenge, so you're going to have to stop there for a bit of time. So that's how that'll work. And also with hostile sea zones, hostile coastlines can be completely closed down. So let's say right here, Tarraco, this will be a Greek-controlled little colony out here. So let's say that the Roman fleet comes down and they're going out fine, they're getting all their die rolls, and then they get to the Sea of Tarraco. Well, now they can't really even roll for, because this is a player-controlled area, they can't roll anymore, because basically this is representing, now they've stopped, and this isn't just some coastline or some tribal village that they can kind of plunder or buy supplies from. This is actually like, you know, the Greek area, basically, that where the Greek like little small naval forces and even coastal forces on the docks and everything can say, you know, no, we're not going to give you any supplies. And at that point, you know, you're kind of stuck there. So in those situations, you can either try to get on good terms with the other players, you know, say like, please, you know, let me through, I'll help you kind of defeat the Carthaginians in the area, and as long as you just let me go and I can keep going. At the same time, the Greek player could try to charge you taxes, which taxes in this game will just be one talent, which is basically one IPC in a normal Axis and Allies game. And so at that point, you'll have to pay that cost, and then you can try to leave. And of course, you can be on pretty nice terms with your allied powers, and they can say, you know what, just go on, I don't really care, and you can ship out and go on your merry way. So that is how basically naval movement and movement in general will kind of work. So, you know, I want to keep this video a little short, so I think that's all I'll really show off in terms of complex movement. Now, just to look at some other areas, you know, just with all their names and everything. And yeah, just kind of how sea zones will work. You can see up here we got the Black Sea, with the Black Sea Kingdom up here. Down here we have the Pharisaian Islands, one of the farthest Roman outposts at one point in time, but they're out there if anyone wants to conquer them. Oh, and that one little other thing to note, I guess, in terms of naval movement, the 2 points here, so basically the Red Sea and the Gulf of Persia, you'll be able to move your warships between these 2 points here that you can see that go off map, but you won't be able to move units. So if you have an army here, it doesn't matter what you roll, you can't just kind of teleport him to the other side, just because of the really long distances involved. And up here we've got the English Straits, and also Ireland, which represents a little bit of a kind of treacherous pass to try to get to it, but they are there if anyone wants to go there. So yeah, and I guess lastly we've got Germania and the really large swath of the Danube region. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this quick little look, and if you want to see a more pointed video, maybe talk about how nations will work, how the kind of national objectives maybe, or surrender, the strong suits of different nations, then be sure to let me know down below in the comments. And if you like these videos, again, let me know in the comments. Like the video. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. We are at 305 subscribers now, so thank you very much to everybody that is subscribed, and I hope to see you guys again. Cobra, out.